Bonjour, Monsieur Marino.
Hello.
Voilà, vous êtes connecté. Donc, vous avez 10 minutes pour expliquer un peu quel est votre modèle par rapport à l'électro-hypersensibilité. À vous. You can take the floor.
Thank you. As you mentioned, I'm Andrew Marino. My training is in biophysics and law. And for about 50 years, I've worked full-time in the area of biological effects of electromagnetic energy, research and teaching in 2 medical schools in the United States. I decided that the most efficient way I could use my allotted 10 minutes today would be to pose and answer 5 specific questions. The supporting evidence for what I say is on my website. First, what is the state of the science today regarding electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome, EHS, the subject of this meeting? In my opinion, the science is woefully bad. It's almost all anecdotal, and the part that is experimental was certain to fail because its experimental design limitations. Much work is needed to permit EHS to be understood so that proper guidance can be provided by physicians who treat the disease. Second, why were most studies certain to fail? Historical factors are important. In the 1930s, biochemistry developed as a subspecialty in science. And in the process, biochemistry excluded electromagnetic energy as being necessary to help explain living systems. The founding fathers of biochemistry held that chemical energy alone was sufficient. In the 1940s, biochemical dogma backed up a little and legalized, from a scientific point of view, electromagnetic energy for purposes of explaining heat and shock. Otherwise, electromagnetic energy was excluded from the canon of biochemistry as being unnecessary to explain the behavior of living systems. As a consequence, electromagnetic energy research in biomedicine went unfunded generally, and nothing about electromagnetic energy was taught in medical schools. Key names in this historical development are Handler in biochemistry and Schwann in electromagnetic energy. Third, what were the subsequent developments? A persistent pattern occurred regarding the health impact of man-made electromagnetic energy in the human environment. One of the first instances was the Moscow signal. American diplomats in Moscow were irradiated by a microwave beam that resulted in numerous medical complaints by embassy personnel, including the death of 3 or 4 successive American ambassadors to Russia. That incident led to a major study in the United States, mostly in secret, regarding the validity of those claims. And after several years, the people involved concluded that there were no effects and that the conditions complained of by the employees were unrelated to electromagnetic energy. Following soon thereafter were other sources of man-made electromagnetic energy in the environment. Microwave ovens, for example, in the late 60s, created a lot of confusion and concern and complaints of a medical nature, particularly cataracts, but not limited to cataracts. But again, after a spate of studies and concerns and Blue Ribbon Committee meetings, it was considered that there were no real effects due to leakage from the microwave ovens. High voltage power lines were next in line in this pattern. A grid was built across the country to allow electromagnetic energy to flow through the company from one side to the country from one side to the other. The idea was that the energy was going to be passed through wires. That was the general understanding, that the energy was inside the wires. In reality, the energy is outside the wires. It's physically impossible for the energy to be inside the wire. But outside the wire, it extended laterally from the wire 200, 300, 400 meters, depending on the voltage of the power line. And human beings lived chronically and worked in that energy field. That situation raised much concern, that much interest, many allegations of health risks and health problems, cancer, particularly childhood cancer. And in the end, another Blue Ribbon Committee advised the government that there were no real problems and there was nothing to be concerned about. Radio and TV towers expanded their ratio and amount of energy being radiated. So people who lived and worked in the vicinity of these towers were chronically exposed to very high energy densities, unlike anything throughout the period of human evolution. And the story was the same. The government, based on advice from selected experts, decided that there was no problem, no health risks, nothing to be concerned about. Then came cell phones, which are just an absolute fixture of the world today, and always will be. They send electromagnetic signals to a tower to convey voice and video, but they also send energy into the brain. And governments worldwide were required to set some sort of standard. And the basis they used for setting a standard was the result of the early work done in the 1940s regarding heating. As long as the signal into the brain did not heat the brain, it was defined as safe. There were no substantive studies that considered other mechanisms other than the thermal mechanism. EHS then developed, and it raised many concerns, just like the previous indicators of consequences of electromagnetic energy in the environment. And we have this present concern today. The latest, even after EHS, was the Havana signal, which is now it's the American diplomats are not in Russia. They're sitting in their embassy building in Havana, Cuba, being irradiated with a microwave and other form of energy beam. And again, there are allegations, particularly of the people being exposed, that it's making them sick. So you can see it's an old and continuing story. And in each of these cases, scientists, unbiased scientists, reported that the energy had effects based on experimental laboratory studies, but the official government reports concluded there were no real effects. 4. Considering now only EHS, how is it possible to conclude that there were no real effects, that the complaints of the people who have the syndrome are psychological or psychosomatic, psychiatric, but not real. That failure was the only possible result of the published laboratory research, because invariably it was funded and controlled by stakeholders. Their research designs used a linear reductive model exclusively. If a little energy really does something, then twice as much energy should do twice as much. If it doesn't, then we reject the hypothesis initially that it did something. In addition to the limitation of a linear reductive model, the assumption was made that heat production was the only possible coupling mechanism between electromagnetic energy and the body. This research design was a complete misfit for the phenomenon of EHS, which is linear and non-reductive. Consequently, the results of the stakeholder-controlled research were inexorably negative, and they politically overwhelmed and continue to politically overwhelm the results produced by unbiased investigators. Lastly, why aren't nonlinear, non-reductive studies on EHS done today? Money. There aren't any sources of funding for unbiased investigators. Consequently, the outlook for people suffering from the syndrome, the electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome, is bleak. I'll answer any questions in the chat.